achievement for Turkish democracy that there is a Kurdish party representing the Kurdish nationalist view in Turkey in the parliament. There were high hopes that after this was done, in 2009, especially 2010, that AK Party would, in a way, finish this project, would do the last part of the project as well. The last part meaning education in mother tongue, in Kurdish, which is a complicated issue, also I think much more complicated than many Kurds or Kurdish nationalists think it is. It's not so easy to find a model that recognizes the fact that Turkish is the mother tongue, is the official language of the Turkish state, which I think it should remain. But next to that, it should be possible in certain areas, in certain schools, to teach a second language. Now, that issue is not solved, and it's become a sort of taboo to discuss also for this government, unfortunately. The same goes for another issue, which I think is not only a Kurdish issue, but it's been brought forward by Kurdish party, is decentralization or regional autonomy, which I think would be an extremely important step for the whole of Turkey to take, not only for the southeast, also for the Black Sea region or for Izmir region. It would be important to decentralize some of the extremely centralized powers of Ankara to the region or to localities. That's a debate that still has to be held in Turkey. I remember AK Party, I think it was in 2003 or 2004, came up with proposals. They were then vetoed by the then president, Şener. And since then also we don't hear AK Party that much anymore about this issue. I think partly because they don't want to be seen as giving in to an important demand of the BDP, of the Kurdish nationalists. Still, I think it's an important issue, again, not only for the Kurds, but for the whole of Turkey. At the end of the day, everybody knows, nobody really likes it, that there has to be an amnesty law to bring down a lot of the PKK guys from the mountains. That's a regular part of any debate between the state and the terrorist organization. At the end of the day, you have to find a way out of this issue as well. So these are all outstanding issues that many people, including myself, hoped that were going to be solved in 2009 and 2010. It didn't happen. For reasons that I think still have to be analyzed properly, AK Party in a way decided to skip that whole part of the agenda and in a way turned to the old-fashioned way of trying to find a solution for the problem by arresting a lot of people, by attacking the PKK in northern Iraq, and by forgetting about the political solutions that are still there. So there I would definitely say that the picture is really mixed. On some important issues they made steps forward, but in a way they got lost in 2009 because there was big opposition. That may be true. It would have taken, and still take, a lot of courage to solve the outstanding issue because it's not very popular, also among parts of the AK Party electorate. But I'm convinced that if the AK Party doesn't do that, they will never be able to solve the Kurdish problem. Then on my third issue, which as I said is being hotly debated in Turkey and in Europe, and that's the media, the position of the media, the position of journalists, freedom of speech, freedom of expression, freedom of the media. There are still quite a lot of ongoing, outstanding, old problems with the media in Turkey. One has to do with the ownership of the media. Compare the Turkish situation, for instance, with the Dutch one. In the Netherlands, most of the newspapers are owned by private companies who don't do anything else than owning a newspaper or a weekly, and in the case of private television, they own the private television, and that's it. That's their core business. Punto. In Turkey, that is not the situation. There, major newspapers, major television stations are all part of bigger industrial conglomerates, which has led to a situation not only now under AK Party, but already in the past. It makes the owners of the media vulnerable to pressure from the authorities, from the government, saying, but guys, if you want this if you want to build this bridge or this highway, because you're in construction as well, maybe you could tell your chief editor of the newspapers to be slightly less critical on our government, because we don't really like this kind of criticism. And one can see that most of the internal pressure within the media is not so much from the chief editors to the editors, it's from the owners to the editors saying, our interest, our long-term interest of our conglomerate, our industrial conglomerate, is with good ties with the government. So don't push too hard, and if you push too hard, excuse or send the journalist away. That is what's happening in Turkey. It's still happening in Turkey. It's a very bad situation, but it's not going to change very quickly. I mean, I don't expect all these owners to sell their newspapers or their television stations very quickly to someone who only owns a newspaper. So it's a structural problem in Turkish media, the vulnerability of the owners to pressure from the government because they are involved in other issues as well. Then, again, compared, for instance, to the situation in the Netherlands, there is a total lack of solidarity among the journalists. I can't imagine in Turkey journalists from Hürriyet fighting or defending the rights of a Zaman journalist. If the Zaman journalist gets into problem, they will think, good riddance, because we don't like your newspaper anyway, and so it's good for us that you get punished by being arrested or being brought before court, and the other way around. So I mean, so there is a total polarization in the media among the journalists as well. While in the Netherlands, although you might hate what the Telegraaf journalist is writing, if he would be brought before court as a Volkskrant journalist, you would defend his rights to say so and not to bring him before court. That's important because if you don't unite as media or journalists, the authorities will always be able to divide you and to play you out one against the other. And that's exactly what's happening in Turkey, among the media, among the journalists. Another problem, again, not new, it was there before AK Party came, but it was not removed, as Mustafa said, it was not removed by AK Party, there is an enormous number of articles in the Turkish penal code, in the Turkish criminal code, in the anti-terrorism code, anti-terrorism law, that enables prosecutors especially, but also judges, to make life difficult on journalists. Whether it is for influencing a court case, whether it is for exposing or promoting the same kind of views as is being done by a terrorist organization. Mind you, if as a journalist you say I'm a strong supporter of regional autonomy and education in mother tongue, there are prosecutors who say, aha, but that's also the demand of the PKK. So you're supporting, promoting PKK. So we'll get you in and we'll keep you in. I mean, this is a situation that is intolerable, and you can't have free media, free speech, critical journalists if you have these kind of laws in place. Yes, they are going to change some of those laws, but it's a partial reform that is not going far enough. So that's an ongoing problem for freedom of the media, freedom of speech in Turkey. Then you have a prime minister. Here I have to be careful in order not to get myself in problems. There is a prime minister who is not very keen, to put it mildly, not very keen on criticism. Now there are many prime ministers who are not very keen on criticism, so that's probably part of the job description. But this guy, Tayyip Erdogan, he goes after them. He has tabled many court cases against cartoonists, against chief editors. Ahmet Altan is one of his favorite targets, the chief editor of Taraf, which from a political, strategical point of view is a totally stupid thing to do, because Ahmet Altan, as a liberal, has to 9 out of 10 cases has always defended the AK Party. Although he probably would never vote for them, he has defended their policies. What does the Prime Minister do? There are 2 columns that he doesn't like, and he sues Ahmet Altan. I mean, this is, with such friends, I mean, that's not going to work. So, I think it will take a long time. It's partly a character thing with the Prime Minister. But it brings Turkey in such a bad daylight from a Western point of view that the Prime Minister can't stand some critical cartoons or critical articles. Finally, and that's a difficult issue where I have to go into some details to prevent all kind of misunderstanding. Journalists in prison. Yes, there are about 100 journalists in prison, and that's a bad thing. It's a bad thing for Turkey, it would be a bad thing for any country. But in the West, in quite a lot of Western media, in American newspapers, but also in European newspapers, there is the idea that there are hundreds of journalists in prison, and that all of those hundreds, so not 100, but hundreds, are all critical journalists of the government, and that they have been put in prison because they are critical of the government. That's the reason why they are in prison. Now let me tell you, that is not the situation. That's not the situation, and I'll explain you why. of these 100 journalists, 64 of them work or are related to Kurdish newspapers, Kurdish radio stations, Kurdish press offices, etc. They are arrested not because of some criticism on our party, because there is a problem with the anti-terror law, as I said, because these guys write about things that the PKK also writes about, and that's why they are arrested. So that's 64% of the journalists are in prison because there is a problem, and there is a problem with the anti-terror law. That was there before our party came to power. Again, they didn't change it, that's why they should be criticized. But it's not an issue of those 64 journalists criticizing the Prime Minister or being critical of our party. So that is good to know. Then there are a couple of leftists, extreme leftists, who are in prison as well. Again, you might question that. Some of them have promoted quite violent resistance in Turkey, which I think is not a good thing to do, and maybe should be punished in any country. And then there are about 15 journalists who you could describe more or less as mainstream journalists who are in prison, some of them already for 3 years. But then you should also make a distinction between, for instance, the guys who worked for Oda TV. Oda TV was not a TV station, it was a website. I never understood why they called themselves Oda TV, but there's a website. And these guys have been openly doing, the only thing they did was, according to me, not journalism, but was making propaganda, asked to do so by the guys who were involved in Ergenekon, to make life difficult and to produce lies on the government. I find it not strange that any government would call these guys in and say, could you explain what you have been doing and why did you contact this guy, why did you listen? That's the thing that I think should be criticized. Again, not the arrest of other TV journalists, but the fact that they're still in prison. And then there are, I've said that there are a couple of journalists where I don't understand, we discussed with Mustafa before, the same goes for him, why Ahmed Sheikh or Nedim Şener has been arrested. These are leftist journalists who have written critical about Ergenekon. Nobody understands, to be honest, why they have been arrested and being accused of a membership of Ergenekon. The problem with those arrests is that it has destroyed the legitimacy of the whole Ergenekon case to a certain extent, with a lot of liberals in Turkey who defended Ergenekon before, but who find it very difficult to defend all these kind of arrests of people who have, at least to our knowledge, no link at all to Ergenekon. So you have journalists in prison is a complicated issue. Don't believe all those people who say hundreds of there, and they're all there because all critics of our party are being arrested. There are newspapers printed every day, 500,000, they bash the government every day. If people want to read them and buy them, that's being done and that continues to happen. So it's a much more complicated issue than that. Now my final remark is, as I said at the beginning, the picture is mixed. You can't say it's a big success, you can't say it's a big failure. That is problematic for propagandists of the AK party or against the AK party, but it is like that. My big fear is that AK party, after 10 years in government, has come to a point that they are starting to have doubts whether they should continue with the reforms and maybe not settle for the status quo. That's a temptation that every party in power faces. If you're there for 10 years and the prospect is that you could remain in power for another 10 years because the opposition is so weak, why would you keep on rocking the boat too much? I mean, you're there, you can use all the instruments that are at your disposal, so why keep on reforming and get rid of this old system that is quite convenient for you once you're there? I think that is would be the biggest mistake our party could make. I'm convinced that part of the old structure, be it you call it deep state or old structures or old elite or old state issues, are still there. They're not gone. And it would be very dangerous, and I think a big political mistake of our party, now to settle for the status quo, to be in power, to use the instruments that were shaped by their predecessors, by the old elite, that are now being used by the new elite, our party, and think we are there, Turkey is much more democratic than we came to power, so it's okay now, and we're fine. That is my biggest worry. One should be critical of all those different issues, look at what the situation is. As I said, on the army it's much more positive than on the Kurds or on the freedom of speech, but the biggest overall problem that I see for the moment is that our party